Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, monimali wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jed Lee, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Oh man, you are in for a treat. You have tuned into the right episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. First, let me introduce an amazing member of the Reading with Your Kids team. She just graduated from Emerson College. She is interning with us for the summer. Please welcome to the show, Madison D'Aires. Hey, Madison, how are you?
Hey guys, I'm doing great today, and today we have a special guest. Her name is Chaya Bluma Gadenyan, and she is the author of Getting Ready For Shabbat, Let's Make Soup.
Hey Chaya, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Thanks to both of you for inviting me.
And Chaya, I love the fact that we are a global podcast. You're coming to us from right outside of Jerusalem in Israel.
That's correct. I really think the world is becoming closer, and hopefully in a very positive way, that those of us who are like-minded, in this case, very big supporters of the Kidlit community and helping families grow closer together, that we can really support each other wherever we are.
Yeah. And isn't it amazing? You know, you're not quite as old as I am, but when you were a kid, and you were sharing with us that you grew up here in the States, when you were a kid growing up here in the States, did you ever imagine that there'd be a time where we could be looking into this little screen and you would see me here in Boston and I would see you in Israel on the other side of the world?
Absolutely not. I'll date myself here, Jed, and say that I remember Pong being a huge, huge technological advance. Boy, that was just amazing. You could move something and on the screen it would affect that little ball.
Doing.
So this was definitely beyond my wildest dreams.
And Madison, if you're not familiar with that, that was a really fast-paced game. That little thing would travel at like, I don't know, a mile every week.
Sounds exhilarating.
It's all relative. Everything's relative.
So, Chaya, you're here to celebrate your new picture book. It's called Getting Ready For Shabbat, Let's Make Soup. Can you tell me and Madison and the listeners a little bit about this book?
I'd love to. This book was inspired by two things. A popular children's song at Jewish day schools and camps called Put the Chicken in the Pot. And also my eldest grandson, who's 5.5, and one of his greatest joys is when he gets to come to us alone on Fridays and to help me in the kitchen. And so these two things sort of came together, one over 20 years old, knowing that song, and one just from this winter. So, in the book, a young boy who's not named comes and helps a woman who's also, it doesn't say who she is, it actually based on me, his grandmother, in the kitchen. And he gets to choose and play with the ingredients that she adds to their soup pot.
So neat, so neat.
Thanks.
And Shabbat is a word that I think some people have heard and may be familiar with, but they might not know what it means. And like a lot of folks, especially my age, it's like if you don't know something, you don't want to ask because you might embarrass someone. So just pretend that you know what they're talking about. But I don't have to do that here because everybody knows I don't know anything. So can you tell us what Shabbat is?
I'd really be happy to. And I'm glad that you brought that up. I think that it's very important for us to ask questions when we don't know and not to be embarrassed. And I think kind people want to have that connection and don't want to sound like they're, mansplaining to other people when they might know things. On the other end, like, I don't want to be explaining things. On the book cover, I actually wrote the Jewish Sabbath. Shabbat is actually recognized by Merriam-Webster, which is my go-to authority, as an English word. And it means the Jewish Sabbath. And I really intended this book to be a very easy way in for children and the adults in their lives to have a little taste of what getting ready for Shabbat looks like. The Jewish Sabbath begins an hour before sunset on Friday and ends an hour after sunset on Saturday night. And so, as you can imagine, that differs with the seasons and how far north or south we are on the globe. And what we're basically doing is refraining from any sort of new creations and really enjoying and appreciating wherever we are with the people that we can interact with face to face, with no devices on, and really be in the moment. And that's a weekly practice every single week. That's what we do.
Something, Madison, this is, for me, and I know there are a lot of religious traditions, certainly within my Catholic faith, that people follow, but they don't understand. When I was growing up and I heard of Shabbat and the Jewish Sabbath, there was, Jewish people, they can't do any work. They can't turn on a light switch. They can't turn on a TV on Saturday. And that's what I heard. But Chaya just shared with us a little bit more of a deeper meaning of that. And I know even within my church that there's a lot of traditions where you don't do this, you don't do that. And that's what people remember. They remember the rule, what you can't do, what you can do, and what you have to wear. But they have no idea of the much more important meaning of that and what that comes from. And, hearing about celebrating new creation, just being there, and taking time to be restful and whatnot is a lot more meaningful than saying, I just can't turn on the TV on Saturdays.
Yeah. I mean, so as someone who's not particularly religious, I was thinking about in regards to your book and just what universal values and lessons can be taken away just from the read, just regardless of your faith or background. Like, what do you think comes out of this book for no matter who's reading it? What are some universal themes that definitely ring true no matter what?
What I was hoping for is empowering a young child. The step stool plays very prominently in his participation in the preparing for Shabbat because he's little and the counters are high. But if you have a good solid step stool, then a kid can do a lot of stuff. And he loves the step stool. He and his younger brother are willing to fight over the step stool because that's who gets to be in the midst of things and helping me out. And it's little things like that, like thinking, maybe I need a really good step stool. And then my child or my grandchild or whoever the little loved one in my life is can be more active participant. And we know that if they have ownership, obviously he's not cutting anything, but he can do a lot of things. And I think that's really could be a powerful message. I think the other thing connects to what Jed was saying about moving from the fear-based to the love-based idea of getting close to God, and how we live our lives, hopefully in a intentional way. And when children are playing, when children are having fun, or even when I'm playing, when I'm having fun, I'm much more likely to continue doing that thing and to do it in an enthusiastic way, as opposed to someone telling me I need to do a chore now. And my grandchildren really want to be involved in whatever I'm doing. They want to be near me. They want to play. That, while we're getting ready, while we're doing cooking, washing, whatever it is, necessary tasks to get ready for Shabbat, we're having a really wonderful time interacting. And I think that's one of the most valuable things that we adults can hopefully take on board, that it's not just about rushing through and getting those tasks done, getting the job finished, checking it off our to-do list. This is an opportunity to spend time and to enjoy whatever it is, especially if there are children around.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love the idea of slowing down and really being present, being a part of the moment, and just being with the people you love. And especially, it's so funny that you bring up the step stool, because immediately in my head, I think about me and my grandmother in the kitchen, and the step stool always came out for me when I was little. And that was just such a inclusive way for me to feel a part of the conversation when all the adults were around. And I think that's just so lovely. So I guess I also think about the way food plays such a big role in culture, in celebration, in tradition, and in any degree, no matter what we're talking about here. So in your opinion, how does food play a role, and what significance does that have to you and your family?
Well, unfortunately, you listeners cannot see me gesturing huge with my hands out as wide as I can reach. A lot of people who don't consider themselves to be religious, if they're Jewish in any way, they'll talk about the food that they're familiar with. And even people who aren't Jewish will talk about Jewish food as being something they know and are comfortable with. If it's bagels, if whatever it is, if it's, hummus, whatever it is that they know that they identify as being Jewish. I was raised in America, as Jed mentioned, and from an Ashkenazi family. And I am married to a Sephardic man whose family all came from Persia. And his friends to this day are amazed that I make the food that he grew up with. This is considered an amazing accomplishment and something to be praised just without end. And it's so funny because to me, it's really a way to connect. If putting a dried lemon in the soup is going to add so much pleasure and give him that taste of his mother's kitchen, Alea Shalom, who I unfortunately didn't get to meet, why not do that? I didn't grow up using dried lemons, but it's tasty, and to learn how to cook the rice the way he likes it, even if that means I need to get this really cheap aluminum pot that I would never ever try, but that's what you need to make it work. I'll do that. So I think it's prioritizing the connective acts over maybe old habits or familiar tastes. And because food is such a powerful, joyful way to experience our world and to feel connected to each other. So in the book, it's all about making soup. I guess I should say that. The book is all about making soup, and most of the book takes place in the kitchen when we're making the soup, and then the highlight is when we're sitting at the Shabbat table, the entire family, with a beautiful tureen of soup.
Well, I love what you just said about that cooking, making the choice to be connective, and it's different than connected, because it's wonderful to choose to be connected to somebody. But in order to be connected, we first have to make that choice that we never talk about being connective, about being open to connections. And I think for a lot of people, that's hard, because when you're open to be connected with somebody, you're opening yourself out to possibly being hurt and disappointed and having to say goodbye to that person at some point. And that's really hard. I think it's harder for adults than it is for kids, but it is really hard because you're making yourself vulnerable, and you're becoming vulnerable to hurt and pain. But I don't know, Madison, Chaya, I think it's worth it, because no matter what that sorrow, that pain that you may feel, it doesn't compare with all the joy that you experience when you are connected with people.
I really like what you said, Jed, and to take it one step further, each of us can choose to be open to allowing things to happen to us. I don't have a podcast. I don't live in America. You do. And you are offering to authors around the world an opportunity. And people can choose to be open to that. And obviously, we've stated openly, we come from very different faith backgrounds, but we don't need to be the same in order to have a really positive connection. Neither one of us is trying to change the other person or convince them of anything. We can just stay in our space and appreciate the other and build something hopefully larger than we could on our own. Mm-hmm. So I think it's also maybe being scared of being hurt and also being maybe wary of what is it going to look like if I'm going to have to talk to someone who doesn't think exactly like I do, or, being scared. And a lot of people nowadays are also, I think, scared of hurting other people's feelings. Like, what if I say something that they take the wrong way? And hopefully we can come from a place of, I know you have good intentions. I trust that. And if someone happens to say something that doesn't feel good to me, then I can be an adult and say, that doesn't feel good to me. And hopefully you'll be also caring enough to say, oh, really? What did I say? I didn't mean anything. And to come to a place of greater understanding. I think that's a huge opportunity that we have.
Yeah. Hey, Madison, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I've said here on the podcast a couple of times, that it seems like, and I know old people aren't great at this. So, but I also know that it like today, it seems here in the States, it seems like people are having a real hard time not agreeing on everything. It's not like we're disagreeing, but it's like, oh, you might like ketchup and I like hot sauce, and that means that we have to be enemies. We're on different teams. Do you think that we're going to be able to get to a point that Chaya is talking about like, hey, just being respectful? We are coming from different places. We have different views on life, but we're all human beings. We're all part of that beautiful human family.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a real concern, honestly. Like, I really see a lot of people having a hard time connecting, especially at my age. Like, kind of like what Chaya was saying, in the sense of like, it's harder to connect because we feel like we're so different. And sometimes even just having simple conversations becomes so difficult because it's like, again, I don't want to hurt your feelings. I don't want you to hurt my feelings. So I hope, and I mean this, and I'm very optimistic in the sense of like, in the future, I really do believe we can come to a certain like middle ground of we're just all people, and like no matter where we are in life, what we're doing, like how old we are, I think we can all be at a certain level of respect where like no matter what we're doing, as long as we just have that mutual respect and we're being conscious of each other, there should be no problem. And it's a hard one, it is, but I'm hopeful. I really am. And I think with authors like Chaya and other amazing authors you have on the podcast, I think a lot of them are spreading really inclusive, fun, and meaningful messages. And like you guys have said, to the next generation, even younger than me, like children.
You've moved into the adult category.
I know. I'm like, I graduated college, so now. Exactly. But these messages will make a difference in that generation. Cause I've even have said to Jed before, when thinking about who I want to be like on the podcast with and who I want to interact with, it's like, I want to interact with people who have written stories that I didn't get to read growing up. And even though it's only been, I don't know, like, let's say 15 years since I was like, or 20 years since I was like that little to be had stories read to, I never saw stories that had like religion, people that looked different, people that felt differently about certain things. And it's so refreshing to be in a generation now and in a time now that this is normal, and that the longer we do this, the more normal it will be. So I'm hopeful. I'm super hopeful.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really love the word that you said, because it's a word that I've thought about a lot. Normal.
Mm-hmm.
I want it to be normal for people to say, I believe in God. I have values that are based in my religious tradition, and not to feel as though that's something that needs to be hidden. Because true, in America, there's a separation of church and state, but I don't think that means that all children's books need to be devoid of an idea of God. I think that is really dangerous. I'll go as far to say that. I really believe that. And I'm so grateful that we have this opportunity to normalize that. I'm not preaching to anybody. That I really think that was clear in my book and who I am. I'm not trying to change anyone, but I think it's important to know that there are a lot of people who believe in God and whose religious values guide their lives. And just like every other life path is accepted as legitimate, I really think that religious traditions also need to be given that legitimacy.
Yeah.
I think that's such a good point because nowadays people are not vocal about their religious beliefs. And it's out of fear. It's out of fear of feeling like they're going to be like the outcast because that's how they feel. And like so much now of our generation is kind of godless in a way. A lot of people don't really have something to believe in. And I think just by even the sheer existence of books like yours and just having the education and the knowledge that this exists and this is beautiful and normal and fine, that just having that is going to just like change. Like that's change easily.
Yeah. Hey, Chaya, one of the things I love, first off, I love that Madison is being open and taking a risk of being vulnerable here, because I imagine there might be some friends from Emerson that might want to come back and go, what are you talking about, Madison? Whatever. But I think a lot of people who are out there saying, there's no God, have not had the experience that you and I have had. I've shared on this podcast, I feel very much that so many things in my life were God-driven or God-inspired. I've shared how I think that this podcast, while it's not religious, came about out of divine inspiration. In fact, because somebody told me I should do a religious show, and I think God said, no, there's enough of that nonsense. You shared with us a little bit about how your journey, you feel that your journey to becoming a children's author was very much divinely inspired. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
I'd love to, Jed. There's a Hebrew word called hashgacha pratit, which means divine providence. And this is a basic Jewish concept that God continues to be involved in our lives on a very, very minuscule basis. It says that a leaf doesn't fall from a tree if it wasn't commanded from above. And the more we pay attention to all of these little things that we could say are just happenstance, the more we see them. You know, I'm hurrying to get somewhere and the parking space right in front of the building opens up and I say, thank you, God. That invites him into my life. That makes me cognizant that I'm not running the show. And this journey is definitely like that. I began writing this book on my own. I'm self-published. Everyone who is involved in this, from my wonderful illustrator, Eugenia Ard, who fled, war zone in Europe and recently, less than a year ago, is in Israel, and we've worked together so beautifully. And another example of someone who doesn't have my tradition and I think created such amazing illustrations that are so warm and hopefully inviting to the reader. And my being on this podcast just a few weeks before the book launch, I didn't know I'm not a podcast person, I'll confess, though I really in my getting ready for this, listening to some of the authors who were on previously, was so inspired. And I think the more we're open to seeing those things, the more I'm humble and pull back of trying to be in control. And that's something I've definitely worked on for the past 30 years of my life of realizing I can have the best intentions in the world, but what's going to be is going to be. And the more I can pull back and just embrace all the wonderful things that I had no idea about before they happen, I think the better my life will be. And, hopefully, I think what you said, Jed, is the deeper level. Any child can look at the book and see the surface level. They have carrots in their kitchen. They have soups a pot. They have a pot of soup. Everyone can say that, but there's back matter also explaining to adults about the Shabbat, and there are also games. So that I didn't at all get to say, I'm just throwing this in. It's not connected. I'm not answering the question. I'm just saying an additional thing. I am a early child educator. I give classes for English to Hebrew-speaking children here in Israel, and they have amazed me in their ability to pick up on English if they hear it. So this is also for people who English is not their first language, who it's a foreign language for them, and there are online games connected for everyone from the book that they can hear the audio. And so really practice the words, and Shabbat nicely rhymes with pot and hot. So, everyone can get the ah sound, which actually doesn't exist in Hebrew. So, that was another part of my motivation in, writing this book, and how it all came together without my intention. 2022, not on the radar. Here we are, June 2023, and there's going to be a book. At least that's the intention, that there will be a book that we can enjoy.
That's interesting. I was thinking, I think you sort of started to touch upon it, because I had a question for you, but you did start to touch upon it. Just in the terms of when you were writing this book and when you were putting it together and felt inspired to write it, were there challenges and considerations that you faced when you were writing it, knowing that it's going to be read by some children and some families with varying levels of familiarity with the Sabbath or Jewish customs in general?
Yes. I think that part of the switch of me doing this was seeing how unabashedly people who are very different from me represent themselves in public and want their chosen identities to be recognized and respected by other people. And this just led me to be a prouder Jew. I'm not making anyone buy my book. I'm not making anybody read my book. I hope it'll be available and accessible and hopefully attractive and enjoyable. And so I think that was sort of a switch that all of a sudden I realized I want my world to invite people in. I can't have everyone over for a Shabbat meal, but they can join us in the kitchen as my grandson and I prepare and hopefully taste a little bit virtually of that experience.
Well, that's wonderful. And I think it's just such a beautiful intention. And I'm so glad that you were led to writing this book. I'm glad that you were led to being here on the podcast. And, the other thing that we just mentioned, and I hope someday that when you write the sequel to this book, you can come back on and we can talk a little bit about, because I always celebrate the fact that when we hear the word Latin culture, it refers to people who live in many, many different countries, and we think, oh, Latin culture, everybody's the same. In reality, it's very different. Same with Asian culture. And you just mentioned that, your husband is from one branch of the tree of Judaism and you're from another branch. And the reality is that there's a lot of diversity and variety and uniqueness within the Jewish community. And maybe you can come back on and celebrate that with us when the second book comes out.
I would love to. That's really a wonderful idea. And it's absolutely true. Yes.
Awesome. Hey, Madison, before I ask Chaya where we can go to find out more, did you have a final question for her?
I think you might have touched on this a little bit, but especially since the book was loosely based on you and your grandson, just if there were particular moments and scenes in this book that really meant something to you, if you could share with the audience why they were so significant.
Yes, there definitely is. There is a scene that he's washing the celery, and they call it pish pish, which means water, a whole, they also say when they take a bath, pish pish. It's a children term, like wish wash or whatever. And it's such a innocent wanting to just be in the water and splash the water. And, children grow up so fast and we lose we lose those moments and, we wash our hands quickly and, move on to the next thing. When then we might say, did I wash my hands? I don't remember. But when you're 5 and you're on the step stool and you're washing the celery and everyone's going to eat the celery you washed in the Shabbos soup, it's a big deal. And sometimes noticing those little moments is so valuable. So yeah, I'm going to pick washing the celery.
I love it. That is beautiful. That is beautiful. Hi, we've had a great time. I think we could talk to you for another hour and a half. But where can we go to find out more about you and find out more about your great book?
Yes, so I do have a website. It's Chaya Bluma Gadenyan, which I won't spell. I assume it's going to be underneath,
in the show notes, yeah.
Right? I don't need to spell it. And I am going to be publishing through a wide variety, so everyone around the globe pretty much should have access to the book. If it's an indie bookseller near you, or Amazon, or Ingham Sparks, or the Book Vault, I'm going wide. So hopefully everyone should have access to it. People here in Israel, of course, can get it directly from me, hopefully. But yeah, and I'm really would love to hear from people. If you'd like to reach out and connect, I'd be happy to hear from you.
Madison and I have had a great time speaking to the author of... Hold on a minute. I have to... I've had a great time speaking to the author of Getting Ready for Shabbat. Let's make soup. Our guest has been Chaya Bluma Gadenyan. Chaya, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you very much for hosting this wonderful podcast. I really enjoyed it.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast and will join us for the next exciting episode. If you want to make sure you don't miss a second of the show, please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Stitch Radio, wherever you get your podcast. And also be sure to visit readingwithyourkids.com and download your copy of the Reading With Your Kids online magazine. It's free. It's available at readingwithyourkids.com. Just click on our blog. Before we go, I want to make sure that I give a big thank you to my team: Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Madison D'Aires, Soji Franklin, Monica Rivera Sosa, Ann O'Leary. I want to give a big thank you to my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me, and most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.